the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And we're back on a sunny Wednesday afternoon, morning. I don't know what it is, but we're back no matter what. And Taylor, do you want to flip the script? You tell people who we are and what we're doing, what they're listening to.
Yeah. Welcome to Doomed to Fail. We are a twice weekly podcast where we tell stories about history and true crime and things that we're doomed and disasters and failures. And we kind of pull from everywhere. So you never know what you're going to get, but we're happy that you're here.
Taylor, I'm going to tell you something that I don't know if it's cool, or sad, or funny, and you can help me decide what it is. So one of my favorite podcasts is You're Wrong About, and they did this episode on 10 biggest business or corporate failures, like Blockbuster, Netflix, New Coke, stuff like that. And I was like, that is awesome. I want to hear about all these stories. It's so interesting how a hive mind like a corporation can fall so flat. And I went on the app that I use for podcasts called Pocket Cast, and I searched business failures. So instead of failure with a U, I put an I there. And I didn't notice. I just started scrolling, and all these podcasts popped up. And ours was in like the first page is 20, and we were somewhere in the middle of it.
What?
The problem is I then changed it to failures, and then we disappeared.
Why?
I don't know. I don't know why that happened. And I looked at it and was like, I was so excited. I was gonna take because their search bar is hidden when you're scrolling all the way down. And so what I was gonna do was I was like, okay, wait. So what are we? What count was that? I was gonna start counting from the top down. So I scrolled all the way up, and I looked at it. It was like I mistyped the word, and then it showed up. And
that's so weird.
I don't know. I don't know if that's fun, weird, cool, or sad, but there it was. I was excited because every time I run a search like that, it shows like a little checkbox next to ones that I've already subscribed to. So I was scrolling, it'll show like Dan Carlin last podcast. And then I saw one, I was like, that's weird. Which one is it? Oh my God, that's us.
Yay! I'm excited every time I see it, like in my list of podcasts to listen to. And I know that I make that list. And I actually don't care. I'm just getting excited every single time.
I love it.
Yeah, if you want, friends, if you have a second, if you give us some reviews, great. And or subscribe and stuff, that'll put us up higher in those outputs. Because that'd be awesome.
Yeah, maybe you know what, guys? If y'all can get us to being in the top 20 of business failures spelled properly, you'll make us that'll be like our Christmas gift for a decade.
Business, I'm gonna do it right now. Business failures. Wait, I think I'm spelling it right now. I don't know. Am I spelling it right? Anyway, very cool. Very fun. It's fun that when we pop up there, like, oh hey, I know that person. Oh, it's me. Love it. I love it. Cool. Well, I will go ahead and get started. Now I want to see if I can recreate what you're doing. This is terrible. I'm sorry, everyone who's new. Oh my God. Okay.
Are you on Pocket Cast?
Yeah, because you told me to be on Pocket Cast.
Okay. Yeah.
15 years ago. Cool. Okay. So awesome. Thank you for letting me scroll through that. Thank you for everyone who has given us reviews. That helps us pop up in things. And that's how I find podcasts a lot of times as I I'm looking at something and I'm like, podcast about da da da, and I like literally Google it, So I'm glad that they pop up again. Okay, so farce. I have been in ancient history a little bit. We talked about Cyrus the Great in 600 BC, and then I thought that I wanted to do um another ancient story, and then I totally like bit off more than I could chew. I was like, what am I doing? I have no idea what I'm talking about. And then I got distracted by what I want to do next week, and then like I had all this stuff going on. So this is going to be the most um first glance junior high paper on this subject, and then maybe we can learn more later, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
So
yeah, so we're gonna go back to 470 BC, which is more recent than 600 BC. I hate it. It's so hard for me. Oh, and I was going to pretend I was going to have you turn on your camera, and I was going to be wearing a toga made out of a sheet, like I was at a frat party, but I forgot to do that, and I also don't know how. But I was going to, um, because I'm going to talk about the father of Western philosophy, Socrates.
sweet. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Did you take any philosophy courses in college or school or whatever?
I'm sure I took it in school, but in law school, their method of teaching is called the Socratic method, and it's all
Mm-hmm, hmm.
based on Socrates and how he taught, presumably.
Yeah.
So I think I got a decent dose of him in law school.
That's great. Well, chime in whenever you have other things to add about him. Um, so I'm going to do some facts, some fun stories, and talk a little bit how we know anything about him at all, because he didn't leave any writings. So we only have like secondhand accounts of people who knew him. And and we'll talk about how he died, which will bring us back to the death penalty that I mentioned in our last episode. So
Cool.
the reason that we know anything about him is because his students were Plato and Xenophon. So Plato obviously is like another very famous philosopher, and Xenophon is the person who wrote the book about Cyrus the Great that I read for that Cyrus the Great episode as well. So he's like a philosopher, biographer, writer kind of guy. And so that's where we get the most of the stuff that we know about him is from his students talking about him. He didn't leave us anything. But Socrates was born in Athens, Greece in 470 BC, and he fucking loved Athens like more than any place ever. Like loved it, loved it, loved it. And I was looking up like where is Sparta and like where is Athens? And they're just like it's just such a small area to be fighting constantly, for like all of ancient times. But he was very like Athenian. He loved Athens, and he fought against the Spartans in different times. And that conflict's going to go up and down. And we mentioned that a little bit. We talked about Cyrus the Great, like all that. But he's on the Athens side.
It's so
He
interesting
also
because like you hear about their culture and who they are as people, like you were all the same people. Like
yeah,
if y'all were living today, you would have nuked the world over 50 times again.
100%. You're like next to each other. Calm down. And I also heard something when I was studying art history, um, a long time ago. I think I took a class about like ancient Greek architecture or something like that. And one of the things that my professor had said was that the Spartans were worried that no one would remember them because they didn't do like the philosophizing and the building. They were more focused on their people, and like making their people strong and like there's like warrior class. So they didn't leave anything behind that like couldn't be destroyed. The way that
Right,
like think of like Athens, we think of Greece. We don't think of Sparta as Greece, we think of Athens as Greece. Well, 'cause it's still there also, you
right,
know.
right. Wait, was Sparta
Um,
Greece?
yeah, it's like in Greece.
Was Troy? Is Troy different?
No, that's a good question. The map that I just looked at, it's like the middle of Greece is Athens, the southern tip of Greece is Sparta, and then like it kind of curves around and Troy is a little bit north. So it's near there.
All the
They're
same.
all it's all very close. It's like
They're all
very
the same people, basically.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so it also feels to me like Socrates was never young, but he was, and we have like a couple stories of him from when he was a young man. But really, we see him the way we see him in statues and in like images as like a really ugly old man. And people say that, and he like talked about being ugly. How that was like one of his like kind of his virtues because he people had to like him for other reasons. He had like a punched in nose and like big bulging eyes. And he would walk around town with no shoes on, even though shoes were available. And he would just like ask people questions. That's just the method, just like a guy who like is around. Um, but he started off as in like a well-to-do family. His parents were Sophrokinesis and Phanerate. He was a stone worker and she was a midwife. So both of his parents had jobs and he had a nice life. He was educated in the way that most Athenian men were, had a general schooling, and then he was also in the military. So he was a hoplite, which is like a just like a I think it's just like a regular guy in the military. So he'd be called in, sort of not like drafted per se, but like we're talking also in the Cyrus the Great one where they'd be like, "Come on, Fires, let's go." You have to like put your bucket on your hat and go.
Yes, I
You
remember.
know what I mean?
Yeah, I had floaties on my arms in that episode, I
Yeah,
think.
like let's go. And so that's I think he was that, but a little bit more prepared because he was like a little bit of a higher class guy. Um, According to Plato, he was in three different battles that were during the Peloponnesian War. There was a siege of Poitiers in northern Greece, the Athenian attack on Delium, and the expedition north to defend the Athenian colony of Amphipolis. So, very Greek words. I apologize to everyone.
You are crushing those.
So there's this place in Chicago that is closed now, but it was called the Parthenon, and it was a Greek restaurant, like in Greek town in Chicago. And it's a great place, and it was so fun. I used to go with my Uncle Dale all the time, and my dad and my uncle would go like during their lunch breaks in the 70s, and it was the kind of place where you could like you order the saganaki, the cheese, and they laid it on fire in front of you, and everybody goes, "Oh, you know what I mean?"
It's fun.
It's so fun. Unfortunately, they closed during COVID, and but my sister, when she was in school later, someone asked where the Parthenon was, and she said Chicago. Just
It's
so
not
cute.
wrong.
No, not wrong. So sweet. Um, but yeah, lots of Greek battles that he was in, and then he comes back to Athens and he begins a life as a philosopher and a teacher. I don't really know what he got like paid for. He didn't need that much money because he was like I'm a philosopher, I don't have shoes kind of guy. But he also had like family money, and I imagine that like he did a little bit of teaching for money, but he wasn't like a lot of teachers during that time were like both like I'm going to teach the young men of Athens and I'm going to charge them money or I'm going to charge them sex. And that's like a thing
Yikes.
that will come up in this, which is like that like old man, young man sexual relationship that some of the teachers had. It sounds like Socrates didn't do that, but I'm not gonna like say he didn't and have that be a thing he did later. It was very common to be like, you are an older man, you are teaching a young man the ways of the world, and that includes having a sexual relationship.
Yeah,
So
not good.
it's a thing that happened like while everything else was happening. Um, so Socrates was married twice. He had three children, probably. And his most famous student, like I said, is Plato. And then Plato's student is Aristotle. So I feel like if you were like Taylor name three philosophers, I'd be like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And like that would probably where it ended for me. So
I
um,
literally cannot think of another one.
yeah. So they are related. One thing that it's going to lead to sort of Socrates' demise is another name that you might have heard is Aristophanes, which is I feel like more comfortable saying because I've heard that name before. He was a playwright and he wrote a play about Socrates called The Clouds. And in that play, he shows Socrates as a person who's an atheist and who doesn't believe in God or gods of the time. And later, Aristophanes met Socrates. Like he didn't know him, but he met him and he apologized because he was like, "Oh, I see that that's not really like you." Because as far as religion goes, he definitely thought that there like was some sort of like being or beings. And he thought that God spoke to him directly, like directly to Socrates. It's called a daimonic sign, where you have an inner voice that stops you from making mistakes. And he was like, "This is God talking to me," but also I think that's just a conscience and like
Yeah,
a
it's just
normal.
you talking to yourself.
I'm not super impressed, but that's like the proof that Socrates was in some cases religious. So some of the things that he liked and some of the things that have like come to us through history because he did a ton of, talking and thinking, and I'll tell you kind of how he shared his ideas. But there's the Socratic method. Do you want to tell me what that means? I'm gonna take
So
turn.
the the way it's used is, well, I'm gonna talk about it in the context of law school. The way it's used was a professor, calling on somebody to, it was like reflective listening almost, is basically the simplest way to put it, was you tell
Yeah.
me what your understanding of something was, and then let me just
Hmm.
prod. I'm just gonna pull a thread and pull a thread and pull a thread until you have fully exhausted all thoughts within that concept that you're trying to articulate. It was
Hmm.
teaching by helping you remove the blockers you have, as opposed to just
Hmm.
telling you, no, this is how it is.
Hmm. Hmm. That's exactly right. It's teaching people to look into themselves and find the answers themselves by asking them questions,
Right.
like asking them questions and pulling on that thread, like you said, and getting them to come to an answer or like a conclusion to whatever they're thinking about. Exactly that. So there's that. Obviously, it's still used today. He focused a lot on ethical focus and self-knowledge. So he said something that hurts my feelings every time I hear it, which is the unexamined life is not worth living, which hurts my feelings because like no one's examining my life.
I don't, I never interpreted that saying that way.
My feeling is like no one's gonna write a Taylor Pinheiro biography, and so like what the fuck am I doing?
No,
Which feels unfair.
that's
And
not okay.
okay,
Any
you tell me because it hurts. I don't know.
everybody everybody else like write in and tell us if you which way you see this. I never interpreted it that way. I
What do
interpret
you
it
think?
as like a lack of self-reflection of one life is not one
Hmm.
that's worth living because you're never able to look outside yourself and improve and
Oh,
change.
I like that.
I
I'm definitely
never saw it as like
self-examining.
it's not
Well,
like
that
Kim
certainly says something.
Kardashian.
That says something about me. That's where I went to, being like, I've done nothing.
Yeah, you are a narcissist.
Uh,
Stop being a
I'm
narcissist.
I'm not a narcissist, but okay, that makes me feel a bit better. Um, Also, linked knowledge as a virtue. The more that the better you will act in society. And one thing that he talked about that I made a note of is like, even if someone does something bad to you, doing something that you know is wrong in retaliation is worse, you know? So he was definitely like, even though he was like in the military and like probably doing things like that, he was very much like, two wrongs don't make it right, you know?
I don't
Um,
agree with that, but sure.
Sure. Also, intellectual humility. So he claimed he would always be like, I don't know anything. I know nothing. I'm just like here to like guide people through things. So that was like a big thing of his too. He was very like humble about everything that like he knew because he didn't like he would be like, oh, I'm just asking questions, just a question
Right.
guy. But people were like really impressed by his questions and the way that he was getting people to think deeper. He also believed that women and men were no different intellectually, which was a new idea for that time. He thought that women should be able to do whatever they want to do. So if they want to, stay at home and be a stay-at-home mom, that's fine. If they want to run for office, that's fine. Which I think makes him a feminist. And he would love Instagram reels of these. I'm sure you don't get these, but like these reels of these like trad wives who are these women who are like, I cook for my husband. I'm not a feminist. And it's like, stop being a bitch. You can do both, you know? The whole idea is that
I
being a feminist is you can do whatever you want.
yeah. I'm also not the demographic for that.
No,
For
totally. Well,
those
I get those. I get
those
those. And it's like, you don't have to put other people down to share the thing that you're doing. That's stupid. But he was very much like, women and men can both be involved in the government and involved. Obviously, like women were not, but he thought that they could. Um, he also had his formal students, but they also had discussions at parties called symposiums. And I feel like we've lost a thread on symposiums. And now it's just like a place where you might go hear people talk. But then it was like specifically a drinking party where you would like drink a ton and everybody would give speeches, which sounds fun.
that does sound well, I mean that kind of is what we do now.
Like I saw a thing also on Instagram where it was like a group of friends being like having a PowerPoint presentations about what they do for work at a party. And like it's so funny because like telling your friends like, well, then I do this and this, and people are like, what? Like, they just don't know what you do every day, you know? But you would like in the symposium, you would drink wine and talk and like listen to others. Um, I I listened to a podcast about philosophy that kind of went into one of the symposiums that he was in where he talks about love, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. But in the meantime, he's just like living his life in Athens, going to symposiums. He has a couple students. He's walking around asking people questions, just like this old guy who has a lot to think about. And there's a lot going on, obviously, in like the government and the military. And there's a leader, Pericles, another name that I've heard before. And Pericles has a mistress named Apasia of Miletus, dear Lord, Apasia. She's also a midwife. So Apasia might have known Socrates' mom, like through the midwife trade. And he credits her with teaching him how to do the Socratic method. He got it from Apasia. She was telling him, like encouraging him to ask questions and pry and like, try to get people to make their own opinions. And he kind of learned that from her. And so he pulled that from her. And he said that to people. He said that he got that from her. Um, there's also a big thing happening because, Pericles is going to die, and they're in all these battles with Sparta, and just like always, there's a thing that's like you know, whether we win or lose is determined by God or the gods. Like that's the thing. Like we didn't pray hard enough, we didn't sacrifice enough animals, and one of his things was like stop sacrificing animals, just like be a good person. And I think that the gods will be fine with that. He was kind of against that. Um, One of the things he talked about at one of these symposiums was about how a god couldn't be beautiful or ugly, but somewhere in between. And that's an idea he got from Apasia, trying to get to this like point where things aren't black and white. You can be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And that was one of the things that he was like talking about with people and trying to get them to think through. So, he's having these conversations. There's a little bit of uprising happening around Greece, and he's talking and teaching, and it's 399 BC, and shit starts to hit the fan for Socrates. So you remember the play we mentioned a while back, called The Clouds? That was 24 years ago at this point. And it should be a piece of the past, but plays are, this is when like the theater, especially in like Western world becomes the way that you like get your news. Have you ever seen like a Greek play where it's like the chorus and the stuff? Do you
I
know what I mean?
don't think I've ever seen a Greek play.
There's like a
I know the
chorus
structure.
that,
I understand.
yeah,
I understand
yeah,
like the structure and the concept of it, but I don't think I've ever seen
yeah,
one in person.
yeah. So the chorus is like super intense, saying the same thing at the same time, right? And then there's
Oh,
like
but yeah,
maybe
yeah, yeah,
one,
of course.
maybe like one person acting, and then like they kind of like go back and forth. So everybody remembers this play about Socrates. Um, and there's also another play called The Wasps that was similarly kind of poisoning Socrates as an atheist, and because he could argue in any direction, which is something that I'm sure you learned that in law school as well, to like argue both
Right.
sides so you understand how to do that. Because he could do that, in these plays, they had him arguing um, young men to hurt their fathers and being like, we can argue you out of this. Like, we can get you out of this if we like figure out all these ways to talk about it. And so people were, still kind of upset about that. That was like in there. Um, and he definitely was like, people need to be smarter. Plato would have the idea of like philosopher kings, like the people in the government should be very, very smart. So he was like also like saying that as well and kind of putting that out there to the people that he was teaching with that like we need to make sure that people in charge are super smart. And he was doing that by like teaching. And post Pericles, the democratic government, which is like all of the men who were not slaves could vote and were like very, very involved in government. Like they all had like a very direct like one-to-one vote, or they were like in the Senate. There's like a lot more people. I feel like now it feels like there's too many people, but there's a lot more people in the government. And they needed someone to be mad at. It's just like everyone's kind of mad. They need like a common cause. So they accuse Socrates of ignoring the gods of Athens and corrupting the youth with impiety. And that's just like telling the youth to question things, which is like his whole deal. So they charge him with that and they put him on trial for those two things. Um, so the trial was held. Guess how many jurors there were in the trial?
I mean, this is olden times, so I'd assume it's hundreds.
Yeah, 501.
Wow.
Because that's like the thing that we're doing. And something that I mentioned in the book that I read that I'll put in the notes is like one thing that the Greeks were really good at was like, they're putting on these stage plays, and they're building these buildings where you can hear from really far away. Like if you were actually like in one of those buildings when they were like fully made and all the things, like if someone's talking on stage and you're in the back row, you can still hear them because of like the acoustics, that they like had. But during the trial of Socrates, they were just like in the Acropolis, and he was just like talking, but like not that loudly. And a lot of the jurors couldn't even hear him defend himself, you know? And
Wait, how big is that?
it's huge, but it's also like not built for that kind of speaking?
Right, right,
Because if you don't have like a microphone, you have to like be in a place where it's like a natural amplifier.
right.
Um, so not everybody could hear him, but in the end, it was 280 for the death penalty and 221 against. So he got the death penalty. His friends told him to run, but he wouldn't. This is just like Oscar Wilde, member did the same thing. His friends were like, "You can just take a train to France and like disappear." And he was like, "No, I have to stay here." And then like Socrates was old, and he was like, he loved Athens so much, he didn't want to leave, and he would never have left. Um, so the question is like, why did the city of Athens turn against this man who was like such a great man of their city? And there's a bunch of reasons, and I read a bunch of different things that people thought. One of them is by an author named Andrew Irvine. He said, quote, during a time of war and great social and intellectual upheaval, Socrates felt compelled to express his views openly, regardless of consequences. As a result, he is remembered today not only for his sharp wit and high ethical standards, but also for his loyalty to the view that in a democracy, the best way for a man to serve himself, his friends, and his city, even during times of war, is by being loyal to and speaking publicly about the truth. So people were just like mad at him for trying to get people to think a little bit differently about what was going on. So he went to jail for a little bit. He tried to appeal, but the death penalty it stuck. And he died in 399 BC, so pretty quickly after he was convicted. He spent his last day in prison. He saw his wife and his kids. He was like in his 50s and he had a young kid. So he was definitely still like with his wife. And she
Wait,
was
you
also
said
someone that he,
60s?
50s, I think.
Oh, 50s, okay.
Yeah. But he had a kid. So his wife and his kid came, and then some of his friends were there, and they were like getting sad, and he was like, "Don't be sad, everybody. Like everything's fine. Like this is what I want. Like this is the way it has to be." And so, do you remember how he dies?
No.
So he drinks poison hemlock, which I he's like dying by suicide, which I always had thought without looking it up at all, that he died by suicide, like by choice in jail rather than something else. But that was the death penalty. It
So I
was,
actually didn't know that he was sentenced to death at all.
yeah. So he, what happens is he's in his cell with his friends, and the guy comes in and he says, "Here, drink this," and it's like in a cup. And the guy says, "Drink this, and then walk around. And when your legs start to feel heavy, lay down." So he drinks this poison hemlock, which is like a root, and he walks around and he's like, "Okay, I'm starting to get tired. My legs are getting heavy." And he lays down and he closes his eyes. And then he kind of like rolls over and he opens his eyes and looks at his friend Crito, and he says, "Christo, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Don't forget to pay the debt," which is we owe an animal sacrifice to the god of knowledge. Don't forget to do that, which is like funny because he didn't believe in that anyway, you know? And then he just rolled
Was,
over and died.
was it because he was like suffering from the poisoning that he said that?
I think he said it as like a joke,
Oh, okay.
like, don't forget to do this animal sacrifice to this at the end of it, I think. But I don't know. That's my guess. But isn't that an
Well, that's
insane way for
unfortunate.
the death penalty to go?
They just have to drink. So, okay, so while I was researching my case or my story, I also looked up what nitrogen hypoxia is,
Hmm.
and it's kind of like that.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, because you have to, like, a lot of times what they do is they just don't breathe. They'll just hold their breath because for the execution to take place, you have to well, not voluntarily, but you have to do something. In this case, in that case, breathing,
Hmm.
and then you get the whatever it does to you, it happens. But same kind of situation. Like it's almost cooler to do it that way.
I think so too. I feel like it's very slow. Like the that and like the electric chair and like those things are like very slow. Like
Well, we're
that
civilized
lasts.
now, Taylor, so we don't shoot people in the head, even though that would be the most obvious way to do it.
I agree. It's terrible, but like there's no like good option. But I feel like that is like you don't know what's happening,
Um, your
presumably.
story. Wait, is your story? Is that it for your story?
That's it. That's it.
So,
There's wait, Asclepius, the god, is a god of medicine, healing, truth, and prophecy. Maybe I said that wrong. But that's who it is.
so it's interesting because I was just listening to. I mean, I need to stop plugging this podcast, but I was listening to Freakonomics,
Hmm.
and their most recent episode is called "How Does the Lost World of Vienna Still Shape Our Lives?" And it was really interesting because it was apparently Vienna back like before World War One was kind of like it was kind of like the way they described it was kind of like New York City is to the world now, where like every
Hmm.
culture kind of goes there and then blends and ends up becoming its own unique culture.
Hmm.
Where they were saying how like New Yorkers are kind of like their own different thing, like they're not like other like a lot of those people come from other places, and but they identify as New Yorkers. They get along as New Yorkers, and how Vienna was essentially that way, where it brought in all these people. And one of the things that they called out specifically had to do with the vast majority of like philosophers and like new wave thinking, all originated out of that era of Vienna, and how it all just came to a crashing halt when
Hmm.
Hitler annexed Austria and by extension Vienna into Germany,
Hmm.
and it was like everybody just fled. It was interesting. I was like, what would have happened if he hadn't done that? Like what?
Hmm.
Like I mean, I don't know. Maybe the U.S. wouldn't have developed into what it developed into, or more amazing things would have came out of Vienna. I don't know, but it was just interesting how historically the fact that you take all these like heavy thinkers, the way kind of Socrates, Aristotle, all these guys were,
Hmm.
concentrated them into one location during one time, and it just like
Yeah,
shoots out in every other direction.
totally. Because you have like one teacher and his student, and then those are three philosophers we know. And you're
Yeah,
like, that was so long ago, and that was just like this one little piece of time. Um, yeah, it's interesting. And then I'm looking at that episode you just mentioned, and it says they're explore how the arrival of fascism can ruin in a few years what took generations to build.
yeah,
Totally makes
that's what
sense.
it mentioned,
Yeah.
and they were like, yeah, it was the way they described Vienna back then was like a paradise, like an intellectual
Ugh,
paradise, where
totally.
everywhere you went, you were going to be around the smartest people in the entire world, and all of them just were like, we gotta get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah. That totally makes sense. I'll listen to that. That's interesting. Yeah, I feel like man, like we're watching the Benjamin Franklin show on Apple Plus. It's so good. It's called Franklin. Um, but it's just like it shows like pre it's obviously like during the Revolutionary War, and Franklin is in Paris to try to get the French to help, and like Lafayette is there, and like a lot of people that we know are there, and John Adams just arrived, and it's so funny because John Adams hates everybody, and it's just delightful. Um, but like the world that they're living in is so ridiculous. It's like live in these places and everybody's just like so dressed up. Like even like the men have like on, powdered faces and blush. And then like they have these like it's just huge parties. And like Benjamin Franklin's son or grandson goes to Versailles, and Lafayette is like, "Oh, you can't wear that. Let's get you new clothes." And they just like call in all these tailors and they make him new clothes. There's always a place to stay and people are just like hanging out. You're like, what is this weird courtly life?
I mean, we could
Super
just do
fun.
that. We could just start dressing up everywhere we go.
I did think that if we ever do a live show, I do want to wear a ball gown. 'Cause like I don't really wear ball gowns very often.
Whoops,
So
there was a bark there.
I did bring
Yeah,
that
well,
back.
we'll have to plan our first. We'll call Madison Square Garden and see if they'll be able to occupy our audience.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Well, thanks
Cool.
for sharing, Taylor. That was cool.
Yeah, thank you. I do want to learn more, but I feel like whatever you learn in school, it's like it just goes straight through you. Like in high school, you're like whatever, and like in college, they make you take like an intro to philosophy course. I was looking at my college transcript the other day for like no reason, and I got like a B minus in intro to philosophy, and I'm like that tracks. I was 18. I was scared.
Yeah,
What
I,
are you talking
I
about?
thought about like, man, if I could go back to like college and law school, I would have paid so much more attention to that
I
than
know,
like
me
the
too.
stupid things that I paid attention to.
I know. It's such a bummer, but like also like I had a good time, but also like poop. I should have done a little bit more, you
I
know.
know. But this conversation with you that took me back to law school. I was
Yeah.
literally just reflecting back on specific classes, and picturing specific professors like posing questions to me, and I was like, oh yeah,
Mhm. That's fun.
that was nice. So
I do like that. I like the method.
yeah, yeah, totally,
I'm cool with it. I'm
totally.
cool with it.
Sweet. Do we
I've
have any other
one
listener?
we do. I'm gonna send you a audio clip from Morgan, our friend and listener, because she sent me an audio clip because I mentioned during the Cyrus the Great episode how fun it is to say Nebuchadnezzar. And she sent me like a 10-second audio clip of her saying the Nebuchadnezzar in Hebrew, in the Old Testament in the Hebrew Bible, and it's great. So I will give you that, and you can play it now.
Wait, are you gonna send it to me
Wasn't
right now?
No, I just did that place so you could splice it in.
Oh, got it. Got it.
And I'm gonna be like, whoa, that's cool afterwards.
And here we're gonna play the clip that Taylor sent
I'm
me.
like assuming you could do this in GarageBand or wherever you
I
do.
can. Yeah,
Okay, great.
totally.
I'll send it to you. I'll
Totally.
send it to you.
So
Play it whenever.
Nebuchadnezzar.
Cool. Thanks, Morgan. Thanks, friends. Also, just
whoever
another
was
plug. Yeah, a plug for a listener survey. I will put it out there. But please let us know who you are so we can find more of you because we're so appreciative of you. And we know there's more of you out there.
yes, there's millions of you. So
Yeah,
please tell us that you exist.
tell us who you are. We'd love it.
Awesome. Again, dubnflpod@gmail.com, the social of dubnflpod. Write us on anything. We're monitoring all those. Otherwise, thanks, Taylor.
Yeah, thanks, Fars.
Cool. We'll chat later.
Cool.
I'll go
Bye.
pause this.